yourself to ideas, different ideas than you're accustomed to, different perspectives. Sometimes it's unsettling, right? But this is what education is, and to learn from each other. So it's really, for me, very gratifying to go to the coffee break and watching all of you engaged. It was like a wonderful noise of discussion and learning. And this is what we're here for, so it's really nice to see. So I thank you and our speakers for initiating it. And ultimately, you know, you're contributing to this. This is your institute, and your contributions, even over coffee or over meals or in the classroom, is what it's all about. So it's nice to hear. So on that note, Professor Dan Michman, and now I'm going to reintroduce the same talk.
Don't have to reintroduce me again.
Okay, well, the talk now is when and why was the term anti-Semitism coined, and why did it become a central phenomenon in modern Europe? Is the term still useful for scholarly research? Good question. So Dan, the floor is yours.
Let's
Thank
see
you.
how the answers will be. So, in the immediate post-World War II period, Jews and many non-Jews believed that the horrors of the Shoah had discredited anti-Semitism to such an extent that beyond some unpleasant remnants, the phenomenon would disappear. And indeed, for several decades, this assessment seemed to be confirmed, at least in the Western liberal world. One of the symptoms of this was the fact that courses on anti-Semitism at universities were not taught anymore since the 1980s. And this was an issue that we discussed with Charles when he initiated ISGAP. That there are no courses anymore, and I looked back at my own career at the university, and I used to teach in the 1970s, beginning of 1980s, and afterwards also did not teach a course on anti-Semitism. Separately, of course, it was mentioned in. But unfortunately, as we all know, the term anti-Semitism has become popular again and hasn't remained a fossil from the far past. Therefore, in recent years, centers and institutes for the study of anti-Semitism were established in various countries and are also sometimes quarreling with each other, and many conferences dealing with the topic, whether academic ones or ones that are more practical, focusing on means to combat anti-Semitism in its various forms. And if we listen to Yossi Shane's presentation, also in the Israeli government, there are several instances that deal with anti-Semitism, and they are not always cooperating. I think that it's also superfluous to say that in view of the many activists in the field who have also varying interests, we experience battles around the definition of phenomenon, and I'll touch upon it in the end a little bit. This is something that ISGAP has been involved in too. But in a provocative article published in 2009 entitled "Away from a Definition of Anti-Semitism," New York University historian of Jewish history and also of the Holocaust, David Engel, I assume many of you are acquainted with his work, demanded, and I quote, "eschewing anti-Semitism as a ready-made category and as a legitimate analytical concept for scholars to be used," because, he said, first, the term is vague and scholars disagree regarding its definition, and secondly, because since the 19th century, it has been a political tool. That is, it is manipulated and manipulative. So Engel wrote that, and I'll quote here there is a typo. No, this is, sorry, I have to go back here. Throughout the centuries, many people have behaved violently towards Jews. Many have depicted them verbally or artistically in derogatory fashion, agitated publicly for the subject to subjection to legal discrimination, discriminated against them socially, or privately felt varying degrees of prejudice towards or emotional revulsion from them. However, and I emphasize this sentence, no necessary relation among particular instances of violence, hostile depiction, agitation, discrimination, and private unfriendly feeling across time and space can be assumed. Indeed, none has ever been demonstrated. End of quote. So this statement wrapped up a 24 pages essay, which had as its subtitle an essay in the semantics of historical description. His study of the use of the term anti-Semitism since the end of the 1870s is detailed and quite sophisticated, yet due to his goal to prove the vagueness of the concept and the disagreement regarding its semantic boundaries, he started by saying that, and here is the typo in the beginning, the term anti-Semit came into common usage in Germany during the early 1880s as a designation for particular individuals and groups demanding an end to recently adopted legal arrangements that had to their minds granted Jews undue influence over culture, social, economic, and political life in their country. Contrary to what is widely believed today, and I now emphasize the following, those individuals and groups do not appear to have been united by any common set of ideas beyond the general feeling that the legal arrangements they opposed were liable to cause German society long-term harm. So these were his statements, and he is quite an authority in the field of history of modern Jewry. So I think it's important to relate to what he said. He even added in a footnote that, and I quote, "It is not clear why the name caught on or what was most responsible for its popularity." So I do not disagree that the broadening and advancing integration of Jews in general societies in the 19th century, resulting to a large extent from the long-term effects of the emancipation process that had started at the end of the 18th century, played an important role in the political activities of the anti-Semitic movements in the last decades of the 19th century, though there were some other developments too that had an impact, and not unimportant developments. However, even though Engel is claimed to focus on semantics, his semantic analysis is deeply flawed, because by starting his description and analysis while looking at the phenomenon since the beginning of the 1880s in Germany, and usually people start in 1879 if we want to be precise, he skipped the formative period of the history of the term, which preceded the 1880s. Moreover, he has been blind to a fundamental aspect of the methodology of the history of concepts, and I talked about it also yesterday. What is the reason behind the coining of a concept at a certain moment, at a certain time? And what can be learned from its form and construction regarding its semantics? And that is what I want to do now with you. From a linguistic point of view, it should be emphasized that new terms are coined by speakers when they feel that in the existing vocabulary there is no word whose semantic field covers the specific meaning of what they want to express. The coining itself can be done by official bodies or spontaneously by individuals, a phenomenon that is most common in slang and colloquial discourse. So we constantly invent terms in order to express something special. Many invented terms remain personal and rapidly fade away, but when there is a feeling by a broader audience that the new term fills in a gap, it catches on and is widely accepted and embraced, after a short time even entering the dictionaries. And those who follow the various editions of the Oxford Dictionary will see that every now and then there are new terms that are introduced. Also, sometimes a new term is invented to upgrade a position or concept which has a negative or derogative connotation, although the semantics remain more or less the same. Such a case in 19th century discourse regarding Jewish history, for instance, is the replacing of the term Jew by the apparently more honorable term Israelite in French or in German and in Dutch. And Yossi Schein related to Napoleon and the consistoire that was established in 1808. And it is interesting to see, by the way, if somebody of you is interested in writing a thesis, nobody has done work on who coined the term, but what we know is that it was introduced by the Napoleonic bureaucracy in 1808. It happens in the beginning when the consistoires in France, in Westphalia in occupied Germany, and in the Netherlands were introduced. So still in January 1808 you have the term Jew, and then in March you find it in new decrees, and there you have Israelite. So it is not that the Jews changed and that this population changed, but it was now upgraded to something which was the same to a certain extent, but also trying to change the understanding of Jewish existence from an ethnic existence to a religious one only, which could be integrated into the structure of the French state. And that was an approach by Napoleon. He wanted to subordinate both Catholicism and Protestantism in its various shades and the Jewish religion into the state structure. So consequently, when dealing with the term Antisemitismus, or anti-Semitism in English, the context of and the reason behind its emergence should be explored. If its meaning was anti-Jewish action resulting from hatred or opposition to Judaism, then of course there were existing terms that were in use before. The veteran Judenhass in German, Jew hatred, and the newer anti-Judaismus, anti-Judaism. Joel used it also for earlier periods, but the term was not used at that. It is introduced at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, with Bible criticism, and there is of course also a deep connection between acting anti-Jews and being against the Jewish idea or the Jewish religion. But it was used in theological studies and Bible research. Following the above explained conditions for the emergence of new terms and concepts, it becomes clear that the term antisemitismus appeared in public discourse as a result from the feeling of certain people in the mid-19th century that Judenhass and anti-Judaismus did not express their understanding of their opposition and animosity towards, and I quote, the real or imagined Jews, and to what turns the various Jews into a tightly bounded collective. Wilhelm Marr, and this is for you, right, who established the Antisemitenliga at the end of the 1870s, declared already in 1862 in his publication Der Judenspiegel, that is the mirror of the Jews, and so in 80, that it is a fact that every social union or association, you can translate it in a different way from the German, in which the Jews get a kind of preponderance over the Christians, cannot persevere. The reason is not religious hatred from one side. Such a hatred does not exist among educated people. It is, however, the alien character or essence of his very being of the Jew, which is, if we may say so, chemically unbearable, and which leads to the resolution of the body through, if we may say so, an anorganic process. We can turn the issue around or toss it as much as we would like, yet we'll always arrive at a point where we'll have to admit that it is not a certain Jew, but the Jews as a collective. In German it is Judentum, which is revolting from our perspective. So this is, if you want to look it up, it is nowadays also accessible online. These 19th century publications were all scanned by Google. He is a representative of Google, so I'm promoting them on this issue. That is, according to Marr, the resistance to all Jews is not a result of hatred or a religious rivalry. It is something essential, deriving from nature and consequently unchangeable. This understanding of the animosity towards Jews, which claimed to be scientific, was the drive behind the emergence and crystallization of the concept anti-Semitism or Antisemitism in German. In the term itself, one has to discern three particles: anti, Semit, and ismus, or ism in English. Each of these particles is meaningful and should be explained, especially when compared with Judenhass, Jew hatred. Anti replaced hatred, Hass. Semit replaced Jews, Juden, and the suffix ism was added to the term. Anti is a neutral, non-emotional linguistic particle meaning being against, used in science to indicate forces or processes that resist or neutralize other forces or processes. Semit, or Semite, is a term from the domain of linguistics, which became popular in the 1850s and 1860s. It is important to emphasize that in the wake of archaeological findings that were carried out in the preceding century, that is in the 18th century, in India on the one hand, and nowadays Iraq, ancient Mesopotamia, linguists concluded that there were what they called Ursprache, original languages, from which later sub-languages developed, and that thus we have in current times language families. Indo-European languages, which developed from Sanskrit in India, right? And therefore we have the term Indo-European, because the speakers moved from India to Europe, and the languages with them, and Semitic languages, which developed from an ancient pro-Semitic language, as it was called. The language itself was never found, but it was assumed that there was such a language. Now, the French linguist and historian Joseph Ernst Renan introduced and popularized the term Semitic languages in his book Histoire générale et système comparé des langues sémitiques, that is general history and comparative system of Semitic languages, which was published in 1855. And 4 years later, in his follow-up book, Nouvelles considérations sur le caractère général des peuples sémitiques, et en particulier sur leur tendance au monothéisme. That is, new considerations about the general character of Semitic peoples, right? And especially regarding their tendency to monotheism. And he made a direct link between the characteristic of Semitic languages to the speakers of these languages. That is, the characteristics of these languages represent characteristics of all the individuals who speak them. And he firmly believed that languages express the inner character of their speakers, and he consequently believed that the Semitic peoples had a certain common character, and I quote here, character, a main feature of it being monotheistic. By doing this, Renan added an important element to the race theories that had developed since the second quarter of the 18th century, who believed that there is an inherent link between the shape and form of people, and especially their external appearance and their internal characteristics, that is, their physical and mental capabilities. And this goes back to the basic study that triggered this development of modern racial theories is from a Swedish scholar, Linnaeus, and he published a book in 1738, Systema Naturae, the system of nature. The original book can be still found in the library of Uppsala University, north of Stockholm, and there he spoke about 4 basic races: white, black, yellow, and red, and that humankind is divided between these 4 species. And this idea was afterwards taken up by scholars, 18th century scholars and 19th century scholars, and was developed and became actually an academic discipline, right? And this is I would say, a racist or racialist essentialism, and this became very common. And it was strengthened by colonialism, because the people said, well, who is really strong? The white race, right? And what is the best music? Classical music, right? And that is, of course, their own view, but that is how they promoted it. And this was also promoted in scholarly studies, and that is important. In the beginning of the 19th century, a subdivision of this academic field emerged, and that is called phrenology, that dealt with the head and how the shape of the head is important to understand what the characteristics of people. And you have whole maps of skulls where you can see where you find love at this side and creativity at the other side, and so on. And there were people, and I even saw it several decades ago in a TV event where there came a specialist who tried to advise a certain person about the profession that he should choose according to what he felt on his skull, right? And said, oh, you have this is broader, and the other characteristic is thinner, and so on. So you should be something like that. So what happened now, that is being Semitic or Aryan, and by the way, the term Aryan comes from Sanskrit and was the designation for the elite, the upper echelon of the people who spoke Sanskrit. It was a Sanskrit term that was embraced in racial theories, and therefore being Semitic and Aryan meant from now on having a certain unchangeable, nature-based form and character. So this is an important background factor that we have to take into account. In an article published in 1873 in no? Here? No. Okay, no. So in an article published in 1873 in a Monatsschrift für Geschichte und Wissenschaft des Judentums, that is the Jewish monthly for Jewish history and science, and those who are acquainted with Jewish history in the 19th century, this was a periodical published by Zacharias Frankel in Germany, and is actually the original theoretician of what later became in America conservative Judaism. In Germany was a little bit different. And the journal editor, Willem Bacher, wrote that and said, a new characterization of the Semites, that is the title of his article, and there says, since Renan made public his well-known theory about Aryans and Semites in his Histoire générale du système comparé de langue sémitique, the image of the latter became entrenched in science and literature, and it has become an axiom to speak about the Semites, with only some exceptions, with the same haughtiness, the same Aryan arrogance as did the French scholar. Indeed, certain counter-arguments were raised against some points, yet the best refutation, a description of the differences between those two most important people collectives from the historical and linguistic perspectives, which are anchored in a firmer basis and are consequently less arbitrary, has not been done. Maybe else is, no, I think I have it here. Here, this is, if you want. This has to be regretted even more because due to this distorted image, the latent Jew hatred, Judenhass, which especially in Germany still exists among many writers and journalists, could become a widespread phenomenon, so to say, appearing as Semite hatred, Semitenhass, and not so rarely pour out its rage under the auspices of a pseudo-scientific shield on the Semitic misters who had become too powerful. Right? So this text is important for our analysis because Bacher, a Jew and with a scholarly interest, testified to the conversion of the term Jew hatred into Semite hatred and to its broadly spreading in common discourse. This conversion occurred quite rapidly within several years between the mid-1850s, when Renan's first book came out, and the beginning of the 1870s. The origins of the conversion are to be found in the rapid penetration of terms from the academic, scientific arena into the general discourse, whether scholarly or journalistic. And this is also another aspect which is very important to take into account, that as a long-term development of the Enlightenment, with an emphasis on the sciences, science became a replacement for philosophy around the mid-19th century. Right? So people would look at results of scientific experiments as saying also something for the social, for social structures and so on. And I know also from my students who came to study history that they felt that they are on a lower status than those who go to mathematics and physics and so on, right? That has a higher standing. And that is something that developed in the 19th century that wasn't there before that period. Philosophy was the highest regarded discipline, right? And now science as such became very important. Therefore this text is important, and the conversion of the terms occurred quite rapidly, as I said, in the beginning of the second half of the 19th century. The origins of the conversion are in this situation, in this context of the ascendance of the importance of science. However, in the process of conversion of the linguistic concept into a social one, the semantics of Semites as a designation for various Middle Eastern peoples also changed and became to designate in European discourse in general, including in German discourse, Jews only, not all Semites. And that is also important in the current context because often it is said by Arabs that we are also Semites, so we cannot be anti-Semitic, right? But if we look at the history of the term, then, and it is a European development in the European understanding, Semites were Jews, and that is their replacement. And the reason was that the Jews, the real Semites that were present in most of the European continent at the time, had already been a problem before. So what happened is that the term Semite thus gave a seemingly scientific label to the deeply entrenched anti-Jewish sentiments and acts, an act which linguistically upgraded Jew hatred and provided it with an apparently new justification. Semitenhass instead of Judenhass was one step in the conversion process. Now adding the prefix anti and dropping the suffix hatred, has converted the term from an emotion-loaded one to an apparently neutral one, expressing natural, non-emotional resistance to Jews, that is a reaction whether biological, chemical, or physical to them. And that is what we saw in Wilhelm Marr's 1862 text. In this context, it is important to emphasize, and again, that's for you, that the Austrian Jewish bibliographer Moritz Steinschneider was apparently the first person to use or coin the term antisemitisch as a response to Renan's theory in a publication in the year 1860, and not Wilhelm Marr in 1879, as is still widely believed. Thus, Steinschneider, from a Jewish perspective, launched a term into the broadening public discussion on language families and races and their social repercussions. In 1860, the term was coined as a response from the Jewish side to Renan theory, expressing disagreement with it, but already understanding it as anti-Jewish. The semantics of the term developed within 2 decades, and the anti-Jewish activists, led by those who also held racist theories, embraced the term with appreciation. Now to the third particle, ismus or ism, which also needs a short explanation. Renan spoke about the character of the Semites, that is, their mode of thinking and behaving, not just as individuals, but as a collective. Consequently, a noun was coined, Semitismus, Semitism, which meant the assumed Semitic way of thinking and behaving. When ism is added to a term, it means an ideology or worldview. Think about liberalism, socialism, a school of thought, behaviorism, an approach, anti-Judaism, right? And the like, based on an essential principle. Moreover, around the third quarter of the 18th century, another important development occurred as a result of the democratization process, which included the broadening of suffrage, the emergence of modern political movements and parties that crystallized their ideologies around certain fundamental principles. So we get, in the second half of the 19th century, socialism, communism, anarchism, and shortly afterwards also in the Jewish world, Zionism, territorialism, autonomism. All these movements and parties were characterized by the isms, which indicated the core principle of their worldviews. The emergence of the term antisemitismus has to be understood in this context. The anti-Semitic movement introduced into the contemporary political arena a political ideology that suggested that the Jewish threat, right, was the reason behind the political, economic, social, and cultural upheaval, turbulence, and crisis of the time. And the second half of the 19th century is a period of enormous social and economic crisis. And they were significant. And organized political anti-Jewish action would solve all these problems. That is what now the anti-Semites proposed. In this new context, but building on and using long-standing anti-Jewish beliefs and images in which Jews and Judaism were identified with money, mammon often is the term that is used, Semitism became a term indicating an ideology of materialism and life based on the golden calf. And this is something also going back to what Joel Kotick yesterday showed in several illustrations. And in our terms today, it will be greedy or unbound capitalism. Right? The goal was to build up an anti to this threat by pushing back what they called the Jewish influence. This did not mean only the cancellation of the emancipation of the Jews, but also a battle against mammon, against money, the Jewish-driven idol of modernity. In this way, the social and economic problems would all be solved. The evolving destructive capitalist economy, the rapidly growing press, a world that penetrated every corner and criticized almost everything, the decomposition of values, the secularization, the negative developments that resulted from the urbanization, and etc., etc. So in the eyes of those who now openly and even proudly identified themselves as anti-Semites, the physical Jews were not only new competitors who penetrated from the margins into the social centers due to the emancipation that they had received and which paved the way for them to enter almost all professions and walks of life without religious or class barriers. The Jews were the embodiment of all the big evils that occurred in the period, the economic, technological, and political transformations that undermined the old social and economic order. From this perspective, the Jews, or what is now introduced, the Jew as a generalization, beyond their physical presence, were viewed as a symbol, the personification of a principle or of a phenomenon. The new term anti-Semitism expressed a stance vis-à-vis a phenomenon that was presented as Judaism, didn't have much to do with Yiddishkeit or real Judaism, and it actually meant capitalist exploitation, communism, stupefying materialism, cosmopolitanism, evil permissiveness, and the undermining of family values, violent free press, and the like. So you can think about resonance in nowadays discourse too. The real Jews were the physical representatives of an abstract phenomenon. And thus anti-Semitism was not a term that came into being to indicate the collective actions of various anti-Jewish activists, as Engel had assumed, but a linguistic expression of a worldview. Indeed, within a very short period, at the end of the 1870s and the beginning of the 1880s, various anti-Jewish groups, and not only the racists, embraced the new term, and some aspects of the original meaning faded to a certain extent, and in a moment I'll explain a little bit why this was important. But we should evaluate what happened in the light of three developments. An up-to-date term, what we have now is an up-to-date term originating in the linguistic and racial discourse, which was widely accepted in the general discourse within a very short period, also by non-racists. The anti-Jewish sentiments were channeled to the political arena and used as a mobilizing factor, and were now presented as one of the ideologies in a market of ideas. And thirdly, this pseudo-scientific term strengthened the public appearance of Jew hatred. In view of these features, it is clear that a new term that was coined to express a new, apparently rational understanding of Jew hatred, according to the interpretation of contemporaries, was in its essence very different from early forms of Jew hatred. Consequently, it could be used by various anti-Jewish groups and ideologies, and it can be used by scholars and us also for earlier periods, even though historically it was a new term. Moreover, counter to Engel's claim, it isn't difficult to see the connections between different anti-Jewish actions or expressions in different periods and different places, because there are recurring patterns of anti-Jewishness to which I will relate in a moment. So Antisemitism, according to my understanding, is a family name for various shades and actions of a basic stance towards the Jews as a collective and towards Judaism as the conspirational thread that binds all Jews together and which is the motivation behind all Jewish behavior. As a historical phenomenon, it is difficult to provide a precise definition of the phenomenon, and I will relate to the new ones in a moment. But one could claim that the vagueness of its contours is part of the essence of this phenomenon. Nevertheless, there are several recurring characteristics which allow for the designation of a stance or event as anti-Semitics. These characteristics are the claim that the Jews are a negative or evil collective, which is different from all other human groups, and that is important. And therefore we can see already with the beginning of Christianity, right, that there is the whole world and there are the Jews who are different, and this continues afterwards. And therefore, even if there are seemingly many types of Jews, in reality there is solidarity between them all, and a certain sinister thread combines all Jews. Maybe this will help with solving the problem that Yossi Sheng showed us before. A basic difference of the Jews from all other negative human groups and enemies is them being the obstacle to harmony, whether human, social, political, economic, and not just another problem. So if we'll solve the problem with the Jews, then everything will be okay. The Jews are entirely rootless. They are not really attached to any location, even not to their country of origin, Palestine. And therefore they can and do move constantly from place to place throughout their history, and thus they can be found everywhere. This makes them the ultimate cosmopolitans. Right? And there is an interesting paragraph in Hitler's Mein Kampf in 1925 where he says that the Jews now via Zionism are trying to follow the Goyim again. They want to establish a Palestinian state. 100 years ago, a Palestinian state was a Jewish state. It's important to say the Palestinian state, but it is not in order to find a place for themselves, but in order to have a basis, a criminal basis for their criminal behavior. Right? So the Jews represent also, and that's another point, a destructive principle: anti-Christianity, Bolshevism, capitalism, greed, and this is actually Judaism. Therefore, even if they are small in numbers at a certain place, the damage that they can and do cause is real and has an impact beyond their nominal number of the percentage of the total population. Moreover, the damage can be caused even in places where there are no Jews at all, because their ideas and and their characteristics are transferred by others. And that is, by the way, historically interesting, because there were no Jews in Tsarist Russia until the last partition of Poland at the end of the 18th century. And when there was this partition and Russia got a part of Poland with a lot of Jews, they had already anti-Jewish policies ready from the first moment, right? So there was something before, and so. The negativity of the Jews is expressed in the unnatural contradictions that characterize them. They are, and that is again very much expressed in illustrations and in art, they are physically weak, yet they are powerful and constantly aim at getting control over the Gentiles. And they often use the term goyim, taken from Hebrew, of course. Their physical appearance is ugly, and that is very central in all the cartoons and so. Yet they are sexually seducing. As they lack any moral, they apparently play the game of adhering to the rules of the surrounding societies, yet they are ready to break and transgress all rules or laws of the goyim when they find it useful and profitable. And the Jews are driven by lust for power, lucre, and sex. And these are recurring let's see. So now I want to relate to the role of the new racial template or terminology in modern anti-Semitism vis-a-vis the 19th century emancipation process. And that is that an essential characteristic of Judaism since the late antiquity is that there is no separation between the religious and the ethnic aspect. Right? Religious requirements define and control who is in or out. And there's even no word in Hebrew for religion. Only in the 19th century, with the emergence of secularism, you get the term that we use until now in Hebrew, dat, but that means law, right? So this was not a problem until modern times, but in a modern political thought, when there is a division and separation between religion and state, right, and ethnic belonging and religion, so you can be a German Protestant, a German Catholic, or something like that. This is something that is a problem for modern European thought. So we have already in the debates on the emancipation in France at the end of the 18th century, the Count Stanislas de Clermont-Tonnerre in 1789 in the French National Assembly said, we must refuse everything to the Jews as a nation and accord everything to Jews as individuals, right? And this is also behind the emergence of the term Israelite, which I mentioned before. Right? Consequently, Judaism is categorized in the new nation states as a religion, a Mosaic faith, like Catholicism and Protestantism. And the new term for the Jews, if you go, for instance, to Vienna, to the Jewish community, it is called Israelitische Kultusgemeinde. That is the Israelite religious community. It's not called the Jewish community, although everybody uses the term Jew. But officially, this is so. And also, in the various European states, Jews, and definitely in the liberal states in Western Europe and Central Europe, the Jewish community was subordinated to the ministry of religion, right? Not to ethnic minorities or something like that. So what happened is that there is the integration of Jews into society, and also because of the emancipation, Jews could leave the community. Jews went to different political parties, mostly in the center and the left, not so much to the right. There were new religious streams emerged, liberal, reform, neo-Orthodox, and you have general organizations of Jews. So you have a lot of kinds of Jews, right? So what holds them together now in this period? And what happens is that because Jewish identity and the possibility to identify the Jews now becomes a problem, the racial theory provided a way to relate to the Jews as a collectivity, even if they look like apparently different from place to place and with different representation. And it allows them, therefore, weaving them all together. And therefore, the racial theory is so important in introducing a new tool to relate collectively to the Jews. And therefore, it was also embraced by those who were not racists, right? But the term itself has this racist background. So that is then. And the question is now. So what happened in...
Before you go to now,
Okay.
could you just recap what emancipation means? 'Cause I don't know.
Okay, what emancipation? Yeah, sometimes you think that everybody knows what... Yeah. Okay, emancipation means giving equal rights to all groups. So there is an emancipation process of Jews. There was an emancipation process of women, of colored people, and so on in different states. For women, by the way, you know, when was emancipation given awarded to women in Switzerland? 1970. Right? So, yeah. So. With the Jews, it was earlier. So, but that is an idea that emerges in the 18th century within the context of the Enlightenment. You have already in 1715 John Toland here in Britain, who speaks about the need for emancipation of the Jews, giving their equal rights, and it is first officially done with the establishment of the United States in the 70s of the 18th century, and then in Europe in 1789, in September 1789, actually, by the French Assemblée Nationale, and from there
So the United States was for Jewish people?
What?
Emancipation for Jews in the United States?
Emancipation for Jews, for all in the United States. So no, in the United States.
I mean, African Americans.
No, not but not for all whites. You can say, right? So there was no moment in the United States. No, okay, the correction is okay. Yeah, they're emphasizing there is no moment in the United States that Jews were second-class citizens. From the moment of the establishment. Beforehand, under the British, there was this difference. But what?
Go ahead.
No, I mean there was a lot of legislation against Jews and also policies against Jews. So I don't think
Policies is another thing. Officially, Jews were equal since there is no situation like in Europe in the 18th century. The Jews are separate corporations and they have a different legal status, right?
that's true.
Okay, so that is what I mean with emancipation. Social emancipation is an entirely different issue, right? By the way, we got
With the U.S. Constitution.
what?
With the Constitution of 1787,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah,
Even though legally speaking, there were states who forbade Jews becoming members of the state citizens, and therefore there was an emancipation on the legal state, including in Rhode Island and so on. I read about it. So it was like the level of states was different in Germany as well.
Yeah, okay. So what I wanted to say is that the first place where emancipation for Jews happened, right, was in the United States. Then you have in France in 1789, right? Then in the Netherlands a year afterwards, in Westphalia and so on. And then there is also a retreat in several German states. So in Germany in general, it's only when Germany is unified in 1870, right? Before that, it was different, and therefore the process of making the Jews equal citizens is a process of about 100 years, right? In Britain, it is in 1857, as a result of elections for Lord Rothschild Rothschild in London and so on. Some people say that the social emancipation of Jews in Britain is the result of David Mendoza. You know who David Mendoza was? Was a Jewish boxer in the 70s, who was the boxing champion of Britain. and is related to as the person who introduced rules to boxing. I've never seen rules to boxing, but that's another thing. And he was that he trained young Jews to fight back, and there are people who claim that that is a major reason for giving emancipation to the Jews later on. But that's another issue. But legally speaking, this is a process that takes time. And of course, in the latest place where this happens is in Russia after the end of World War I, with the establishment of the communist regime, the Bolshevik regime. They officially gave emancipation to the Jews. So the emancipation, giving equal rights to the Jews, legally, socially is a different issue, is something that is a process that started in the 18th century and is concluded only in the 20th century. Okay.
But I think Charles was getting at this is important. Say in the American context, the word has a very, very powerful meaning having to do with the freeing of slaves.
Yeah, I know.
The word emancipation. Yeah. That's its.
And there you can see also that there's a difference between the legal aspect and the actual social aspect, right? It's not the same. Yeah.
So you want to take Q&A or you want to finish?
No, this is. I only. I have several slides, but I won't read them. What I just want to mention, and it is something that this what they call the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is not actually the IRA definition. It was people after the Durban conference in 2001, which was very anti-Semitic, and anti-Semitism was on the rise in different places, and governments wanted to know how to deal with it. There was a process of giving a workable definition for anti-Semitism in order to understand. This is a definition that is now embraced by, I think, 1,600 organizations, states, and so on. It has several problems. It is vague, but it was formulated in order to help police and other institutions to understand, because not everybody is attending ISGAP seminars, right? So in order to help them. What happened is that it was I will not go. Oh, maybe I'll see short here. The definition, the working definition is anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews. A certain is already a question, which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. As you can see, it didn't deal at all with things that I talked about now, but it is focused on what to do now when you have attacks on synagogues and Jewish organizations and so on. And it is quite vague, but it has been used and is being used. And there comes in the question that is discussed here in this seminar constantly, and that is anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. And as we know, in many manifestations of anti-Zionism, we can find the elements of anti-Semitism that I mentioned before. But here comes in the political struggle of today, and suddenly as a response or reaction, we got 2 years ago the Jerusalem definition of anti-Semitism, which was signed by a lot of scholars of Jewish history and so on, but with a political tendency, certain political tendency. And what you can see there, and again, they speak about classic anti-Semitism, and they say, okay, this linkage between Jews and evil continues in the present, but their main problem is the main problem is Israel and Palestine. So they say denying the right of Jews in the state of Israel to exist and flourish, okay, can be defined as anti-Semitic, but a lot of other things not. And I won't read what is here. You can get my PowerPoint presentation afterwards. El Shaddai can send it to you. But and I've learned that you should never put such a dense text on a slide, because nobody will really read it. But what you will see is that there is, in spite of what he said in the beginning, the emphasis is on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And that is what bothered them. And they wanted actually to reduce, to take out from the battle against anti-Semitism a lot of things that can be called anti-Zionist and anti-Israel, which are anti-Semitic. So it's a problematic definition, and Charles organized a petition against it, which you can find online also. And then we got a third one, the Nexus document, which is also by the United States, was a new Nexus task force, formulated it, and it's called Understanding Anti-Semitism at its Nexus with Israel and Zionism. And again, you get a certain definition, but it's with the emphasis on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So in the two reactions to the IRA definition, you can see that the motivation is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and not so much the general issue of anti-Semitism all over. And not everywhere the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is central. Right? So not in Lithuania, not in Poland, and other places. So what we can see that, as is usual in the field of Jewish thought, there is no agreement even on what anti-Semitism is. But I want to conclude that what I think is, versus what David Engel said, I think the continued use of the term is legitimate. But of course, one has to use or to identify the elements that I specified and how they are applied to Jewish individuals and the Jews as a collective. And nowadays, anti-Semitism can often also be found attitude towards Israel as an expression of the Jewish collective. And this again is the issue of the collective of the Jews. That is something that is brought forth as a threat to anything. And analyzing the claims against and behavioral policies towards Israel with the help of the elements that I specified will reveal if they are really anti-Semitic or bona fide, even if critical. But none of the new definitions is perfect, and as I said before, I think one of the essential characteristics of anti-Semitism is that you cannot give a really hermetic formulation, but you can identify it. And scholars should therefore delve deeper into present-day texts, behaviors, and policies that they encounter and point to the exact anti-Semitic elements that are used beyond stating that something is anti-Semitic. It is always important to prove it, to show that there is such an error, such a characteristic, and therefore, in order to keep usage of the term useful and helpful, proper use is needed, and I think that is what we are doing here in the ISGAP seminar.
Thank you, Dan. So, Aaron?
Yeah, just for my own clarification, from both presentations from Yossi and Dan, because you're talking about, fighting anti-Semitism, defining anti-Semitism, Yad Vashem, the power of memory. Yossi's talking about the power, keeping the power, the sovereignty of the state of Israel as a way to resist and fight back. So just for my own clarification, I know you're both saying the same exact thing, and I didn't take from Yossi's presentation that he was saying that those of us outside of Israel in the diaspora that, we're fighting anti-Semitism. I don't, in no way was he saying that, they can exhibit power where we can't. And I think there was a couple of questions about that, but could I clarify this by just simply saying that the way we resist, as Wiesel said, indifference always helps the victimizer never be the victim. So, first of all, we can't have indifference, but the old phrase, the pen and the sword. And so, in Israel, could I say, you fight with a sword, you fight with a sword and resist, and you fight with a pen. But those outside, what I think Dan is talking about, we have to fight with the pen and the tongue in our resistance. Is that a fair way to kind of clarify what you said, Yossi, and what you're saying, Dan?
Well, I think that what the reason behind the establishment of this ISGAP was exactly that of learning how to debate and to counter anti-Semitic claims, right? Because just shouting isn't enough. You have, at least in academia, I think it's important. It has become more and more important because so much anti-Semitism has been introduced into academia, right? So giving an answer with proper proof and understanding historical developments, I think, is important.
If I may, one word, I think that the idea of the pen is never divorced from the question of power.
Right.
Be it Israeli power or the American power.
Right.
We saw it at Durban. The American are boycotting Durban. At the time, it was Colin Powell and not going there. This was an assault of a different nature at that time. Just at the time, almost the same week of September 11, right as it was. Where I guess you said in English, so it's not the intellectual effort and the definitions are constantly need to be sort of like with diplomatic power, pressure. These are not just intellectual, I would say, exercise. It's not just definitions.
Yeah. No, it's not a definition, but I would say one thing. I think that the academic discourse, the academic research on anti-Semitism, providing insights into the developments and what it means, has allowed for non-Jewish forces and governments to come in, because people who are open-minded can get convinced by academic let's say research, right? When you can show it, and because otherwise it remains a talk of the deaf.
Yeah.
Also, two quick points. So first of all, intellectual discourse ideas affects policy, and policy affects public discourse. So this has a bearing on society. And Yossi and Larry will remember the slogan, 22 for every Jew. So there has been examples of Jewish organizations in the United States and in other countries going into issues of self-defense, physical self-defense. We're going to the CST. So they don't take an offensive physical approach, but the CST, the Community Security Trust, you'll see on Monday, is defending physically the Jewish community. So there's variations. Soon.
Thank you, Doctor, for your presentation. For me, I wanted to kind of clarify the position of the Jewish and black relationship, particularly in Jim Crow South, where Jews were lynched alongside blacks. There's a great book, Without Sanctuary, which is a website where they actually show Jews and blacks who had alliances and partnerships were murdered. And so even the World's Fair of 1893 in Chicago, they had exhibits that showed and projected African black people as inferior, Jews as inferior. And it was a whole setup because it enhanced the color caste system that you spoke of that was really rooted in this scientific racism. And some theorists argue that even the whole whiteness theory of assimilation, that Jews who were of European could better assimilate to kind of hide themselves in this racial context. So the black and Jewish relationship has been strong even through the civil rights era because both groups were being attacked systemically through those racial constructs. I guess my question is, especially dealing with Semites, because I loved how you gave a more thorough, specific definition, because I hear that a lot, in the States, that, well, black people are Semitic because they're the original people, and, and the original people were Jews, and so how can we be anti-Semitic ourselves? But based on that definition, thank you for that clarification.
Okay,
What's the name of the website?
WithoutSanctuary.org.
Without Sanctuary.
And they used to make postcards. They made postcards of lynching and would send these postcards all over the world and throughout the states where they showed people being, people celebrating lynching black people, Jewish people, and others. So.
Thank you so much for giving us that history on the term anti-Semitism. I was fascinated with it. But do you think in today's culture that the term anti-Semitism is the right term? I've often thought that as I produce some documentaries and things. I think almost anti-Jewish is a better descriptor. And then the second question I have is, of the three definitions of anti-Semitism, I've used the IHRA definition. I didn't even know about the other two, so thanks for bringing those to light. Which do you think is the most appropriate? If you had to choose one, which do you think would be the most accurate?
I choose my own presentation.
But in a shorter.
No. Look, there is a difference. There is, for us, the possibility to analyze texts and expressions, right? We as scholars or political activists. Another thing is what state institutions need to do, especially when there are violent attacks, right? And therefore, I think what happened is that in many places the IRA definition, as it is called, right, is helpful, right? What happened with these two others is that they said something about anti-Semitism in general, but what they are interested in was the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, right? And the debates with also the Israeli government and so on, because especially regarding the Jerusalem Declaration, right? From the list of those who signed it, I don't know where, some 50, I think I know 45, right? And I know where they are situated. And they didn't approach me, for instance, right? Or some others who were, so, and we know that politics enter also these issues. And many of them are people with whom I cooperate and on a daily basis, and they are excellent Holocaust scholars and so on. And I'm also sure that, and I know it even, that some of them, as happens with petitions, they signed it before they read it, right? So when you have this kind of declarations with a long list of people who undersign it, you have to be careful, right? Because it is not anymore a definition; it is a petition, right? So there are elements that I totally agree with in the Jerusalem Declaration, and also something in the Nexus that is less important, I would say. But I would be wary regarding all and have my own stance.
So we're running slow on time, so Carolyn, then Joel. I'll try Isabella if we have time.
Okay, thank you very much for a really important conversation and material. I think this is not my question, but I think like when you touched about the definition and the difference between religious characteristics and racial characteristics, it also tends to affect, I think, today and maybe throughout time, Jewish identity. Are we religious or other things? But this is like for a different conversation. I think the three definitions that you brought bring up really interestingly Israel as a matter of the Jewish identity and criticism on Israel as a matter of anti-Semitism. And I'm not sure if this is part of like of what people know, but until 1966, criticism on Israel counted in Germany and in other places as anti-Semitism. And in 1967, something started to change. So I wanted to hear you in what you see Israel as an important, criticism on Israel as an important thing within the three definitions, and criticism on the IRISE that it does not invite criticism on Israel. So just wanted to hear you about that.
You
But-
said until 1966, Germany considered criticism of Israel
And also in Europe, Ken Marcus wrote a really important, I think, chapter in one of his books about the Merriam-Webster definition of anti-Semitism, and when actually there was a shift, because it was kind of a common knowledge that criticism on Israel is anti-Semitic, and then something started to change in 1960 after the war.
But that is in the definitions, not in any legal procedure.
No, it was just a dictionary
In
definition.
a dictionary, okay.
And Merriam-Webster is an interesting dictionary because it is based on common knowledge of definitions of how people address things, which is like more bottom-up than top-down definitions. So I'm just like curious. It's interesting to me to see how Israel became part of our Jewish identity, and criticism on Israel is an important thing, right? Is it anti-Semitic? And the three definitions try to say when the line passes, when it is anti-Semitic to criticize or not to criticize. So. And I'm not sure if it's a question, but yeah.
The one thing that is clear that until the 60s for sure, and even later, the church itself, the Catholic Church, of course, did not recognize the state of Israel. So Israel was not recognized, and anti-Zionism was part and parcel of the policy of the church. Keep in mind that when Herzl went to Pius X, approached Pius X, and Pius X said, "We will never recognize the Zionist group because you never recognize our prophet."
Does it count as anti-Semitic?
It was perceived, and they accepted it.
So,
Eventually, only in the 90s, when they signed with us, and of course, again, the AGC had a very important role there, and David, what's his name, Rabbi David, Rosen was flying and so, and eventually they signed the deal. And the fascinating point was that in 2014, for the first time, the Pope went and laid a wreath on Herzl's tomb. And that was the time when the church recognized the state of Israel officially. And in fact, when I went to the Council of Bishops in Washington and spoke to Father Michman, I remember what he said. This was the most important moment in Christianity since the time of Luther. Because this was for us to accept Jewish sovereignty as a recognition that the Jews entitled to sovereignty rather than people who were devoid of sovereignty because of their betrayal of Jesus the Messiah. Now we recognize and it's a full circle we have come, and therefore anti-Semitism is no longer acceptable in all forms in the churches. And that was a major shift. So what you're saying, I would be very interested to see the material in Germany, because I really am not familiar with it.
And also Europe in general.
It's interesting.
And I want to say another thing, that the IRA definition, as much as I know, was actually created in order to understand when people doing surveys in Europe and asking about anti-Semitism, how they can actually identify if the answers are anti-Semitic or not.
So-
it is in the wake of the Durban conference.
Yeah.
It
So,
is,
yeah, and also ISGAP played, I think, an integral role in creating the IRA definition. We did many seminars
yeah.
trying to define anti-Semitism, and yeah, it comes out of Durban and the reemergence of anti-Semitism. And it's a straw man's argument. You can be critical of Israel and not be, according to the IRA definition, anti-Semitic. It's clear. It's a straw man's argument.
Well,
So we're
just-
yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No,
Last word
just-
to Dan, and then
Yeah.
we're.
Is that what you said? Sorry. So what you said about the 6 Day War and that it changed, it is changed in, especially in, let's say, leftist organizations in Europe, in Germany, and so on. And there is also in this by the Soviet Union. So the approach. There are different drives that have an impact, but. The attacks or criticism of Israel as a collective, a Jewish collective, yes, if you use the elements that I brought forth, that I mentioned there, I think you can see when it is anti-Semitic or not. So when Roger Waters does things, you can see that this is anti-Semitic, right? Because what is said by him and others said, if there will be no Israel, there will be harmony, right? Everything will be okay. So that is one of these elements, right? If you say, okay, there is a problem and we should do this or that, and how to solve it, that's another thing. But I think that in these criticisms, if you use the elements of what anti-Semitism throughout the generations was and how it was, let's say, how it crystallized, then you can see, then you can clearly see. Now, I know that a policeman in a police station somewhere in southern Denmark will not be able to read all the literature, but he needs these simpler definitions in order to be able to implement the policies of fighting anti-Semitism.
And we don't have time to open the IRA definition, but it has a problematic perception. So people perceive the IRA definition as problematic.
I haven't formulated it, so I also have my remarks and comments, but anyhow, yeah.
So, Joel, very, very quickly.
Very short. I fully agree with you, and I of course I've got my own opinion on anti-Semitism, but I think the IRA definition is extremely important. First, because it has been adopted by 44 countries, which is very interesting, and 1,200 different organizations, even football club. And it's an excellent tool.
And universities.
And universities and regions and political parties,
Council of
including, of course, the European Commission. So that's why it's a wonderful tool. And also because for the first time, we integrate the anti-Zionist aspect of anti-Semitism. Telling that you can criticize Israel, but it depends how you do it. So I think it's an excellent tool, and we try to use it as much as possible.
Cool.
And
That's it.
for the first time, those countries actually who adopted acknowledge the fact that some criticism of Israel can be anti-Semitic, which is actually very important.
Yeah. And on the final note, just food for thought before we go and have lunch.
Before food.
Before
Food for
food.
thought, before food for...
I recommend people, there's a book by Ryan called Blaming the Victim, and the tendency in liberal thought and a liberal worldview to look to the victim of racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism as the cause. And we all know that stereotypes get you coming and going. Jews are segregated. Jews, secretly take over and assimilate into society, and they take over and control. I was saying earlier, African American men, lazy but aggressive. If we look to the victim, I think it's a dead end. We have to look to the values of the dominant society, of the symbols, of the theology, of the social science, the philosophy, to understand, I think, the different types of hatreds in society. So look to the dominant society, and I think we have to be careful about looking to the victim to find solutions to the problem. Just a thought. On that note, Dan, thank you very much. And enjoy lunch, and we'll reconvene at 2:30. El Shaddai.